Okay, sorry about that. I was getting eaten up by mosquitoes, and I was like, I'm going to go upstairs. I will restart this. I'll actually put this in chat. Sorry about that. I was getting bothered by mosquitoes, and I'm like, I'm going to go upstairs, and I will restart the live stream. And I could not get my camera back. So someone had a question about AI and why I don't talk about it. I don't know if I'll wait until that person shows up. But okay, yeah. So the thing about AI, so my father was a pioneer in AI research, and I learned about it, sort of stuff he was doing from a young age. And I worked sort of in a, let me see if I can make this light my face better. No, it's toppling over. Okay, there we are. I was on a number of AI projects in my last job, and I was the one who was always sort of being like, hey, this, we have older technologies. Thanks, Zimaihan, you too. Sorry about the interruption. I was thinking it would be like a 5-minute interruption when I ran upstairs, and then I could not get the camera back. It just would not. I was waiting and waiting, and I waited like another 5 minutes, and it just didn't want to come back. And I don't know what to toggle. Like often, turn it off and on again, right? But there was no like turn off and on the camera toggle. So I think if I do like an outdoor live stream again, I will probably, I might end up making this one private if no one shows up. I feel bad. I would have not completely closed the computer if I'd known it was going to do that. I would have like stuck something in to prevent it from closing and turning the Wi-Fi off. But I thought it would just, because when I was doing the first live stream, I had Zuli, and I'm realizing like whenever I'm on a call now, like she'll be on my shoulder fine. And if I'm on a call and I start talking to the computer, she will start getting nippy at me. It's not about her being antsy about being up here. She doesn't like me talking to the screens now. But anyways, so I ended up closing the computer to put her back because I couldn't turn off the camera like the regular webcam, like YouTube software doesn't have a thing for that. And then I came back and the camera came back on, so I figured it would happen this time, and it didn't. Anyways, so the AI stuff. I fundamentally, where do I even begin there? I think, like, if I could get a venture capitalist to give me like even 5 million, really $20 million for like 5 years, I could, with a team of 12 people, do a lot better than most of the market leaders for 2 reasons. One of which is that fundamentally, I think most of the people in AI research have what I've called a cargo cult approach to it. And there's sort of a number of things there that I don't have. But then the other thing is most of these companies are sort of trying to, blitz scale it, build it, and then find uses. And I'm like, if I were building it, I'd sort of have basically a Seneca's barbell strategy based on Nassim Nicholas Taleb, right? Where I'm doing basic research into intelligence that may not be directly related to LLMs on one hand, and then I'm trying to figure out how can I use the current models to make things people actually want on the other hand. And that was actually my New Year's resolution, is I was like, I'm going to, my New Year's resolution was I want to get to the point that I could potentially get in a room with like a venture capitalist who funds loan startups and convince them that I can do this. And the reason for that is not because I actually really want to. I mean, again, if I met a venture capitalist doing this, especially because right now I'm not making an income and it's an interesting problem to solve, I would absolutely do it. But the point is more that to make self-employment work in general, I realized I needed to get better at a number of things, one of which I'd already gotten better at since I got laid off, but then 3 that I hadn't, which are productivity, self-promotion, and networking. And so I've gotten way better at productivity, and I'm still not, like, I get better and then I get worse, but like my baseline productivity is way up from where it was. And then social self-promotion, I'm still working on that. I'm still underselling myself, and I really need to work on this more with YouTube titles. I need to start doing things that are, by my standards, a little bit clickbaity. And you can see one of them, one of those won my most recent video. The initial titles weren't doing very well, so I replaced them and replaced one of them with a title that I felt was more clickbaity, but it won in a landslide. And now that video is climbing back up to where my videos normally do. So I don't know if it'll get there, but it's getting in that direction. So I need to get better at doing clickbaity titles. I hope my internet is stable. If anyone else, okay, good. So it's not. But anyways, right. So I think like cognitive science, social science in general, like I said, broadly comes down to sort of two things, Seneca's barbelling, which is I would be trying to, if I got money from it, I'd be trying to, first of all, do like basic research into intelligence and not like, I'm interested in animals. I'm interested in like emergent cybernetic properties you see with like microbiology. And then I would be trying to like very narrowly like find what is the actual like market for what people could actually use models we have now, but people aren't really serving that, and try to do them. And because I've thought about, like, there are a number of things that I would potentially use if they existed. The question is, do market research, what is the demand? And so that is, on one hand, focus on immediate profitability with the like the second half of it, but also focus on building what people actually want. And then with the first half of it, again, I think you need what Thomas Kuhn calls revolutionary science. And I think you're only going to get that by sort of going down a bunch of rabbit holes that don't necessarily seem related to, immediately related to AI. And I still don't think you're going to have. So I think to even possibly have an AGI, you would need to have a number of things that, and in my article on like AI cargo cult, like I sort of articulated them. I don't think we're doing any of them right now. One of them, modularity, they're doing some elements of it, but it's not really reflective of the kind of like organic redundant modularity that you see in real cybernetic systems. And then you, again, it's going to need to be embodied. And I'm forgetting, I know because I listed out, but I'm forgetting what the third, because I've had this argument before. There's really three things I think you would need to do. And so having them embodied is, agency. They need to have motivations. They need to have like, and right now the motivations of AI are basically getting, more positive clicks of or interactions, right? But it needs to actually have sort of like, and there is something called agentic AI. And I'm like, oh, maybe, and no, I looked into it, and agentic AI is not what I mean when I'm talking about AI sort of having like motivations and agency. And I don't know that that would be a good idea to do. Like, I don't know that we want to have like AI that has internal motivation, but I think you would need at least those three things and possibly more before you had a real chance of getting an artificial general intelligence. Because we, like, human intelligence, as I said in my one short that I made, didn't come about by people setting out to design, or didn't come out through an attempt to design intelligence. It came, not familiar with what term, but yeah, human intelligence didn't come out with human intelligence didn't come out of trying to design for intelligence. It came out of sort of trying to solve problems in our environment. And I am very much a believer in the Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis. I believe that living in complex, individualized societies meant that we sort of needed to try to understand other minds and our relationship to other minds. And I think that is where our consciousness and problem solving comes out of. Oh, agentic. So, okay, yeah. So agentic I forget exactly what agentic AI is, but it's not. When I was talking about like AI having agency, it's like humans have, I mean, all like at least sapient or sentient organic life has internal motivations. And I think a lot about the example of the bowerbird, where I feel like that's sort of a good model for thinking about humans, because the male bowerbirds, right, they are building these structures and then they're decorating them and showing them off. And like biologists would look at that and they would be, so like the goal is for the goal is that the male bowerbirds are trying to reproduce and pass on their genes to the next generation by attracting females, but that's not really, I think, what's happening with the bowerbirds. The male bowerbird selects, like evolution has selected the male bowerbird to want to build these bowers for the sake of the art. And I'm sure like if you could have a conversation in English with them, like he'd be like, I'm not trying to get laid. I'm trying to build a bower because I'm an artist, right? And that's like a lot of human motivations. They've evolved because they serve us in some end or they promote some end, but they exist for their own sake. Like the drive to create art exists for its own sake at this point and motivates us to its own sake. In some cases, to the extent of harming our ability to reproduce. Like I don't know if any of you are familiar with Paul Erdős, the Hungarian mathematician, but he spent his entire life just traveling around lecturing and solving math problems, and that was all he did. And of course, Immanuel Kant, Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla also didn't reproduce because they were so immersed in their work that they didn't really have a care for anything else. And I do not have that level of monomania. I still want to find a partner and have kids, right? But I also have, like humans have, we have all these motivations that go beyond simple reproduction or simple sort of pain avoidance / pleasure seeking, which is actually, that's an interesting point, because the way that AI works now, it's very much sort of working on behaviorist assumptions, like the behaviorism B.F. Skinner, which Arthur Koestler has called flat earth psychology, which I feel like is kind of an insult to flat earthers, to be honest. Behaviorism was really dumb, and that's sort of how Noam Chomsky built his reputation, was just demolishing behaviorism. I'm not sure if I missed any questions from the old chat. I saw the AI one, and then I was like the mosquitoes. I'm like, I'm gonna go up, and then I had to thinking again. I could just get the video back, but it wouldn't come back. Oh, was it The Handmaid's Tale is genius? Actually, about what? Sorry, I forget where I was talking when you asked that question. But that one I was. So I said, I had initially, like I had a long list of video ideas that I wanted to make, mostly that I didn't even write down, but I remembered them. And I was like, again, because I read Lolita and Handmaid's Tale at the same time, sort of trying to figure out how to write, interest in the question of writing unreliable narrators and write like unpleasant situations and people, sort of a benefit. That one, but not like in a landslide. Okay, the one that it won in a landslide was my most recent video, where I'm talking about squid evolution, mass extinctions in the Ice Age when humans started arriving places, and English grammar, where the establishment, like the evidence for squid evolution and for English, well, for squid evolution, it should at least have been considered like that they could have evolved from belemnites. For English grammar, it seems like it should be considered credible that these grammatical features came from Welsh. And then with like the mass extinctions, like again, I was mostly focusing on the fact that the timeline lines up so well with human arrival. But then there were a number of other things that I realized I should have discussed in that one. But that one was basically, I've been thinking about doing something like this for a while. And I initially thought, like, the one that would probably win, like, as a good hook is, well, what do squids, mammoths, and grammar have in common, right? Because it's, and that one actually completely, like, lost the A/B title test, like, did the worst. And the whole video was doing poorly. And it's hard to tell because I had that one 42-minute video that the audio was bad. And I was also doing the I was letting myself go on digressions more in sort of a manner that was consistent with Henry Hitchings called Proustian, to see how that would go. And unfortunately, because I screwed up the audio, I don't know, but a lot of people did complain about because this is how I naturally talk, is I tend to go off on these digressions, and then I'm editing that out, and I'm like, I should see, because the people watching this are presumably more like me than they are like the average person, and people who are like me tend to be fine with and even appreciate the tendency to digress. And so, but that video did really poorly, and I initially thought it was, okay, the title issue, but no, it's just people didn't like it between the audio and the arrangement. And so then since then, YouTube has been like, my videos have been doing worse for the most part in terms of like views and like just click-through rate. And so I've been trying to figure out how do I, because I don't think it's the videos. I think the videos, I'm doing the same thing as I was when I was getting like twice as many views. I think it's just, I'm getting less click-through because of that video and the algorithm pushing it less. And so I need to come up with videos that will like up my game. And that means I need to start thinking of titles that are going to be more clickbaity, which is a very hard thing for me to do. And I would like brainstorm with Microsoft Copilot, and it pretty much never had a good title idea, but the ideas that would come up with and its reasoning would be helpful. I'd be like, oh, here's an idea. And occasionally I'd get titles that actually worked. And then Microsoft put Copilot behind a login now, which if Microsoft wasn't constantly logging me out, I might put up with, but with that, I'm like, yeah, I'm not. So I've been trying Google Gemini, and Google Gemini is just, not only are the titles possibly worse than Copilot's, but it doesn't show its reasoning. So it doesn't actually help the way talking in Copilot. So like, okay, these are a bunch of dumb title ideas that are simultaneously clickbaity, non-descriptive, and not compelling. So the initial point of doing a YouTube channel was two things. Was I want to test my ideas out to try to figure out what what could actually work for me and sort of get down there. Thank you. Yeah, I keep looking at, sorry, I'll answer the other question. I'll come back to this. So that goal one is like, it's a platform to test sort of ideas and sort of circle around and figure out what I might want to actually do. And then the other one is, again, have enough people as a potential like core audience to, if I make something that people might want to buy, to actually share it, right? Because if you build a better mousetrap and no one knows about it, right, it's going to take, not only is it going to take a long time for people to find, but probably the first person to find it is going to be a Chinese company making a knockoff of the better mousetrap, right? So it's to have like a little bit of, so it's to test ideas and then hopefully have a little bit of critical mass of people to, if I actually have a good idea, to sort of get that kick started through word of mouth. And yeah, I've really only been uploading reliably for about 6 months, even though next Wednesday is my 1-year channel anniversary, which I might do the video on that on Tuesday, because I might be going down to 2 videos for a while I try to figure out, again, I need to start figuring out what I can do that's going to bring in money. And I think storefront and signing some stuff for that would be useful, but it's going to take some time to actually work out how I want to set up the storefront. Again, probably I'll just use Zazzle to start with, and then what designs might actually be worth doing. But anyways, yeah, so what was I going to say? Right. So yeah, but the thing is, so the channel, I've been doing this for 6 months, and I'm looking, and there are channels that, like, whenever I see a channel that does like an interesting video, I'm immediately now, like, I'm going to the channel history and I'm looking at how many long form videos do they have? Are they doing shorts, and how many? Because you'll have the list of videos, but it includes shorts and live and like regular long form videos. And so I'm looking at that, and what I'm seeing is, when I see channels that like really impress me and I'm like, I want to be doing this, 95% of the time, they are doing way better than I am with fewer videos. And occasionally I'll see channels where I'm like, I really want to not be doing this, and they are doing way better than I am with way fewer videos as well, because they're doing things that like I have an aversion to, but apparently work. And then there are a few channels where it's like, I want to be doing this, and then I'm surprised that I'm actually doing better than they are, like on a per video basis, seemingly. And but then most channels, like I'm almost at, I'm almost at 18,000 subscribers, but still in 6 months, and to get monetized in the first month that I was doing videos regularly, like that is better than most people do. And some of it is that I've been thinking about it for a while, and then I sort of did, like the first 6 months where I put out 4 videos were in some way me testing both what worked with audiences, but more importantly, what worked for me with production method, and realizing that what I was doing didn't. And I also did 3 other videos on the other, like the arts and crafts channel, which was basically a sort of portfolio applying to try to work for Navica, which I had already planned on like mentioning their stuff in the video because I like their stuff and I bought stuff from them. But I was like, that also shows like this is my interest in this subject and it's relevant to what you do. And I think someone there did watch it, but they never got back to me. And now I'm not interested in working for them. I mean, if they got back to me, I still might, but I feel like my impression is they're kind of a mess behind the scenes. Anyways, and so like I'm not doing, like there are people who are doing this better than I am, and generally there are people who I'm recognizing like, yeah, they're doing where I want to get, and I need to figure out how do I get to doing more like that. And YouTube, obviously, it's kind of winner take all, so we tend to see more of the channels that have a lot of people. But I'm reminded, like I see channels, especially when they're like, I'm thinking they're doing, this is a better video that I'm making, and then turns out they have like 2,000 videos and 5,000 subscribers, and I'm like, okay, I'm doing better than that. And I do think I'm at the point now where I can, to some degree, like I can test my ideas out and see how they do. I do think if I came up with something good, I have enough people watching who would give it a try, that if it actually was good, that probably would be enough to spread it through like word of mouth. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, as a former freelance marketer, I guarantee every single business is a flaming mess behind the scenes. Doesn't matter how polished they look on the outside. That's good to know. That's reassuring in some ways and concerning in others. And yeah, work ethic, posting video every day. That was video every day was me trying to just demonstrate that I could. And I think I'm still roughly like putting out the same amount of like time, like, or putting in like the same amount of time. I'm just doing longer videos. For the most part, it's the longer, somewhat, it seems like the sweet spot for me in terms of what does well seems to be between about 12 and 25 minutes. And longer than 25 minutes, I had one that did well and then one that did terribly. And shorter than about 12 minutes, I've had only one video that I think did really well, and that was just the one explaining Brian Kaplan's signaling hypothesis for education. Yeah, my channel is a ton of videos with no subs. Yeah. Raw number less important than the opportunity of surface area in the game of YouTube. I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean by that. I do think there are people who have relatively few subscribers but have more like influence and people know who they are. And I think like I've noticed that happens in 2 ways. And one of them is there are some people who have small channels, but they're like in everybody's comments. And so people start noticing them. Like Raph Bluetex, I mentioned his channel last night I was watching. I only know he exists because he is like in the comments of like half the other booktube channels that I watch. He hasn't been in my comments yet that I've seen. I haven't really been checking comments recently, so if he was, I wouldn't see that. But and so he is one of those people. He has like 2,000 subscribers and like 1,000 videos, I think. But I recognize him because I see him, and he generally makes, well, a lot of the time he makes interesting comments. And then you also have, and I'm not going to name names here, but you have people who have relatively small subscriber count because they are drama channels and they are themselves kind of dramatic people. And so you have people who both sort of enjoy the kind of dumpster fiery commentary and also sharing it. And then people like clip and respond to their videos. And I want to definitely, I want to avoid that. And that is why, like, I mean, I mentioned I have a hard time extricating myself from drama, but the big thing is just I want to avoid becoming like a channel like that, where I'm notorious for making a bit of an ass of myself and then in an attempt to sort of make fun of others, and then that goes around. But so I'm not sure if either of those are what you mean by like surface area in the game of YouTube. There are definitely channels that, like, the people who watch them are like out of proportion to the size, and I'm surprised by how many people I meet that watch them. There is one channel that I won't name names, although I might do a vague booking poll about it at some point, that I was someone who I thought read about as much as I did. And then this person has a thread on kiwi farms, if you're familiar with that. And turns out he actually reads about like half to a third of what I do. And it's not clear he finishes all these books. But, and I noticed like on his channel, it didn't seem like he got a lot of the books he read. But I was just someone who seemed to read as much as I did and in a wide range of topics was a novelty. And people, like multiple people, would ask me to respond because I'd have criticisms of his videos. And I tried to script a video and I just couldn't like script a response video. And now I don't think like his channel has sort of stagnated, but that's sort of been like an inspiration in the opposite direction of I want to, on one, it's inspirational that he's become as influential as he did, but I also want to not, I think the thing about kiwi farms, because I'm someone who, like, if I did this 10 years ago, I would absolutely have gotten myself a kiwi farms thread. I think the thing about it, though, is they can't really hurt you that much unless you react to them. Like, the worst they can do is like dox your address, which people can find in public records anyways, if you really want to. But it tends to become a problem when people start like responding to them and engaging with them. But it is, as an autistic person, it is sort of a cautionary tale of when I see people who make asses of themselves and then get threads on kiwi farms. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is sort of proof I want to try to not do this. But let's see. So I think how to grow a larger audience is straightforward. It's just a question of if one wishes to do it. I would not wish to, as I think templates and predictability are suffocatingly boring. So I guess, so what I think what you're saying is, oh, that's an interesting point. So I guess, yeah, subscriber count isn't as useful as a metric as finding one or two clients who's interested to pay for your work. And I have, so my sort of mentor, Sean, set up an email for me that then I could not get set up on Thunderbird, and I haven't checked it in months. And shit, I might have someone who actually wanted to pay me, and because it was all like, I was checking it, and it was all like just people selling me web design and SEO service. So I need to actually check that and suck it up. If I miss someone, that sucks. But then I need to actually, I think, set it up to forward, because I cannot get like the IMAPs thing that he gave me working with Thunderbird, which is how I check all my email normally. But that's a good point. Is, yeah, if you're doing sort of high-end services and you can figure out what people want, and I have ideas there, like on my consulting page, although I'm sort of moving away from that a little bit as well. But let's see, how to grow a larger audience is straightforward. It's just a question of if one wishes to. So I think templates and predictability are suffocatingly boring. So is this, so I think what you're saying here is like a lot of people have said that the way you grow your channel on YouTube is you sort of test out like a bunch of stuff and you see what resonates, and then you keep making more of the same. And that's sort of what you're saying, I think. I think there's ways to do that work. So, for example, Nick Pardini, who was an inspiration for me in making the channel, Analyzing Finance with Nick, he realized the thing that was like driving his channel growth was elite theory. And so he does a lot of that. And that works for him because he is a financial planner in Orange County. I think it is Orange County or Los Angeles, and works with like a lot of rich, well-connected people. And so he knows what both old money and new money look like. My videos on elite theory like topics tend to do pretty well, but I don't think I have enough that I can add value there to make that my thing. I would not want to be hedged in as all that. And so it's sort of a balancing. I don't think I could make videos if I just kept doing on a narrow thing. Like my gender video did well. I wanted to do some follow-up videos to that. But if I made like a bunch of videos, I don't have that much interesting to say on gender, especially at least not in the form of like related to books. And I also don't like it is one of, as I mentioned, like 3 or 4 things that I'm trying to figure out in my first part of the live stream. Matthias, are you the person Michael Sartori said that I should get in touch with that I never did? Is that you? Your name sounds familiar to me. I'm actually going to look at Bram's channel. Let's see if I can. Let me see. What are your most popular? I'm looking at Bram Adams' channel. Mentioned because you have more videos than I do with under 1,000 subscribers. And although your most successful video, let's see. Why programmers should read the classics? That sounds interesting. Actually, I'll watch this. Try to watch this sometime this week. I think, I don't know if you want. Let's see. AI Studio. So this AI Studio lets you use Gemini and check the thinking for like titles, ideas. And so I see what you're saying, Bram, because your channel is very focused on like useful things for programmers to know, basically, right? And so that is a good advertisement for like consulting people either trying to improve their career or trying to sort of train their workforce. And that is something that I have thought about, is like I do have like on paper, I have a pretty compelling case to make people hire me for AI stuff. But as I was sort of answering that question, the problem is I'm very skeptical of how most Gen AI stuff is being used commercially. Another commentator who was channel was Christian Academics and Pro Wrestling. Interesting. So like Tirzu for pro wrestling, because I know Tirzu like started out trying to like it was the idea was trying to get gamers interested in zoology by framing it in gaming, but then it attracted people like me who I'm interested in zoology. I have no interest in gaming, but I still found those videos interesting. Yeah. Building reading systems. Oh, cool. You worked at OpenAI. How was that? That's the company. I've heard a lot about a number of companies' work cultures, but I don't think I've actually heard anything about OpenAI's work culture. Like Amazon sounds like a terrible place to work. Facebook sounded like a mostly good place to work, although I figured if I ever wanted to work for Facebook, I would have to have a Facebook account, which I do not want to have. And then they did a whole bunch of layoffs because they were basically sort of, well, Facebook sounded like they were basically hoarding people to not work. And so that gave you sort of free time to get paid and like work on your own projects on the Facebook clocks. I understood it for what I heard. Yeah. Pre-chat GPT era. Okay. Yeah, I was introduced to like a pre-release model at Chevron of ChatGPT. I don't know if it was version 1 or 2, but I think that was end of 2023. So reading systems. So what do you mean by reading systems? Like in terms of deciding, is it like how to decide what books to read? Or I want to make more books on that topic, but I want to make more videos on that topic, but I always feel like I'm sort of repeating myself from a slightly different angle a lot of the time, because basically I feel like sort of the two key concepts for me are I'm following ideas backwards a lot of the time, like who influenced people I like. And then I'm trying to build like a map of how ideas relate to each other in terms of like frameworks. And I feel like, I guess maybe frameworks, the fact that I think of ideas as frameworks as opposed to just sets of facts or individual theories might be a third thing. But still, I feel like I always want to make more videos, but then I'm always like, am I adding enough or am I repeating myself? Oh, that's really cool. So he's teaching workshops on how to improve comprehension and throughput at Brooklyn Public Library. Shortly before I got laid off, I reached out to my local Harris County Library system, and they were enthusiastic about having me, possibly because they had someone who was doing the adult literacy program and who was leaving, and then like other things I could have done, like computer literacy, for example. And so they were very enthusiastic. They're like, hey, yeah, here's like, reach out to the Harris County people. And I did, and they sent back, all of our volunteer slots are full. Please contact us again in another 2 months. And I'm like, first of all, one of the things I'm offering to do, like, I know the library doesn't have this thing, but I'm also like offering like to build these programs from the ground up. And I have some experience doing that kind of thing, not as much as you do probably. I've I'm very much jack of all trades, like dilettante in that kind of thing. But I've done, when I'm teaching English and then when volunteering at nature camp, like I've had experience like sort of designing like how do you teach programs, and sort of critically I feel like I have the like design metacognitive skills to do that. But I was like, yeah, I don't want to keep, like, they didn't even read what I said, and I don't know if the library policy is like you need to do like certain trainings. We only have, for volunteers, we only have so many spaces, and so we're like rate limited by that. But it was very much, they didn't even acknowledge, and I'm like, it felt like I was saying, hey, I want to like shelve books, and they were like, yeah, we don't have space for that context in 2 months, which was not what I said. And I'm like, I just didn't bother after that. That's one of the reasons I want to get back to Massachusetts or New England, is like small town libraries. I think there's more scope to do that kind of thing without the huge bureaucracies. But it's Brooklyn, New York is even bigger than Houston, and so it's nice that you were able to do that. Was that, I assume you went to them with that idea, and then they were like, that's cool, or did they recruit you to do it? I imagine it's sort of any sort of civic thing tends to be easier in smaller towns, but also like just larger cities, there's just more people around. So like I'm in 3 book clubs: science fiction book club, philosophy, existentialist philosophy reading group, and then I'm in an online book club for international books, which is fun because they recognize half the people I talk about, which most people like even like, I'm not particularly well read in like literary fiction, I feel like, but most people I talk to will either admit to not knowing what I'm talking about, like pretty much anyone I mention, or they will be sort of have a blank look on their face and nod. And so having people who actually recognize and can comment on people I read is, yeah, I think Pacific Northwest maybe, and actually Utah too. Like that is one of the interesting things to me about Mormons and Mormonism is that like there is this big culture of reading. Oh, Bram, have you seen the Brooklyn parrots out of curiosity, like the wild parrots in Brooklyn? I, as you know, I have a Quaker parrot, and I've seen them in the wild in New Orleans and Austin. We have them in Houston, but I have not seen them, and I haven't met anyone in Houston who's seen them. But I know, like, awesome. Have you seen the Brooklyn Parrots channel? They have a couple of songs about them that I like, the Little Green Parrots from the Argentine and Avian Invaders. Yes, it was. So I remember you said a certain class of people loves reading about suffering in literary fiction. Was it symbolic capitalists? I have an opinion on that. Yes, it was. Musa al-Harbi mentioned that symbolic, I forget exactly how he said it, but basically that symbolic capitalists tend to like dark, gritty fiction as sort of a voyeuristic exploration into the suffering of others. And that made me feel like I already knew I hate grimdark, and I felt fine being like, yeah, I'm not going to read grimdark in science fiction and fantasy. But I felt bad about like, I made it 2/3 of the way through Mr. Presidente, which I do not know if I will finish because there's not a lot left, but it's so painful to read. I was feeling like I should finish it because it's an important like Latin American critique of like the Guatemalan dictatorship. And then realizing, oh, these books become classics with like Western audiences because these people are into that in a way that I'm not, sort of ended my guilt for like if I feel like finishing it, I will. But in general, I'm trying to avoid literary fiction that is overly dark, at least if I suspect it's overly dark. And that's also like a lot of literary fiction I'm realizing isn't necessarily as dark as it sounds. Like I read a book called The Murderess for the international like fiction world literature reading group that I attend. And I was skeptical of it, but I loved it. And I want to talk about that book on my channel at some point. But oh yeah, some of the Quakers and the parrots in the botanical garden. That is cool. Yeah, in Austin, I generally see them around East Austin, like from not East Austin, but like north. So like from Mueller up, sort of like the east side to like Northeast Austin. And yeah, thank you. And then New Orleans, like they're right in downtown New Orleans, the Quaker Parrots. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I sometimes watch Andrewism. I haven't seen that video, but I am definitely interested in that. You are, yeah, you are. Yeah, assuming. Where in Texas are you? I'm hoping to not be based out of Texas this time next year, but we'll see. Austin, okay, that's definitely a better place to be than Houston for a number of reasons. I might actually, if I had gotten laid off and I was in Austin, I might have actually been able to find another job because I could go to in-person job events that just don't really exist out in Houston for tech jobs, because really in Houston, tech jobs are oil and health, and I don't have the credentials to do health. And I got laid off by the best oil company to work for, and the other two are Shell, which is a little bit worse, and Exxon, which is terrible. And I don't want to even try to work for Shell or Exxon. So yeah, I will check out Anderson's video because I have mixed feelings on him. He has, I feel like, a lot of the same blind spots of a lot of sort of online left anarchists, but he also does have interesting observations. And I've watched probably a half dozen of his videos over, I think I found him first like 3 or 4 years ago, maybe. And again, Social Capital. I want to read Bourdieu, but it's a thick book, and I've decided I want to read Bourdieu. I want to read Pareto. I need to finish Wealth of Nations, and I've been going through that slowly because the chapters are on the long side. Like each chapter is typically about half an hour-ish to read, I think. And so I kind of want to make a video about that, but it's a low priority. I'm actually probably more likely to go to New Hampshire than Massachusetts because the lower taxes and less strict laws. But The Keene area is still accessible to Western Mass, where like all my connections are. Houston AITX monthlies. Let me see. Okay, I found that. I will look it up later. I'm from Western Massachusetts, and I definitely don't want to be in the. I mean, if I had a job like that was a good job in like the, which highway is it? The I-28 corridor, is that right? I would live in the Boston area, but I want to live somewhere more rural, but still like with the small town like amenities. Like the Keene, New Hampshire area seems perfect for that to me, because it has sort of, it's similar to Western Mass where I grew up, but it's in New Hampshire. Where did I put? Is it? I'm trying to figure out. I have. Oh, there we are. Idris Shah. There we are. I had a few of these that I use different like shades of purple, and I try not to use dark purple too much, but for ones that I thought were particularly, I really like. I reference Idris Shah a lot, and then I don't talk about him nearly as much as I. Donkey and the Cactus. Let's see. Oh, here's another good one. The Scholar and the Philosopher. A scholar went one day to see a practical philosopher to determine the origins of his system. As soon as the question was asked, the master handed the academic a delicious peach. When it had been eaten, the master asked whether he would like another. The scholar ate the second peach. Then the philosopher said, "Are you interested in where this peach was grown?" "No," said the scholar. "There is your answer about my system," said the master. And so that is, I feel like that one's actually a good illustration of a lot of my problems with how AI is being approached right now. I assume so, but that is sort of the point, is we have a tendency to want to, when we like the fruits of a system, a lot of people will tend to be like, hey, how do I do this? But they don't really want to look into what it would take to actually produce it. And I, for one of my videos, I talked about like, imagine that you're, so this is actually, I think, a good example sort of what I was illustrating, but imagine someone says, hey, teach me how to grow cucumbers. And I'm like, okay, well, so you need to find like a sunny garden spot and like prepare the soil, and then you're going to plant the seeds. And it's like, no, just tell me how to grow cucumbers, right? And sort of want there to, like, if you make something look simple to people, people want you to just like be able to sort of hand that over and be like, here's like how to make this work. When it's often figuring out how to make stuff work requires often indirect knowledge, or requires intuition, requires often getting at it in an indirect way, and it requires a lot more sort of digging and learning like behind the scenes that people don't necessarily see. Are people on the autism spectrum more detail-oriented and less able to black box systems? So that's interesting question, because on one hand, I actually wrote a post and then I didn't publish it, and then I published it with a note, hey, I wrote this and I'm not sure it's quite right, but Sherlock Holmes and the double meaning of detail-oriented on my blog, where I talk about like people would describe me as detail-oriented, And then people say autistic people are detail-oriented, and people think I should be able to do detail-oriented jobs. And I tend to be terrible at a lot of these detail-oriented jobs because I realized they're talking about two different kinds of detail-oriented. So they're talking about like the details of implementation, where I am just prone to careless errors, and I struggle to do the same thing over and over, and I make more careless errors. And then there is like the looking at things from a variety of angles and the details of what do you see from these different angles. And I think, like, for me, like, I definitely struggle to use systems simply as black boxes. I want to know how they work. And a number of people have commented on this is I will be often slow to learn more with implementation. Like if it's high level concepts, I'm always the first one and I'm getting it. And then stuff like the first time it's explained, even before it's explained, and then people are like, who aren't like, even at the end of the class, still aren't getting it. And I can often sort of explain a little bit like, oh, I think I get it, and then it still doesn't really get it. But when it's like implementation level, I will be really or relatively slower to learn stuff than a lot of people. But then once I've learned it, I can do things that other people would not think of. And I've had a number of people like observe this about me. And I realize I'm also not as slow as I think because I'm comparing myself to, there are people who are like really good at implementation. If you give them just a system, they will like learn, okay, I can do it this way. And then they're usually not that good at thinking outside the box, although there are exceptions. And so I compare myself to those people and I'm like, well, I'm slow compared to them, but I'm also better at thinking outside the box compared to them. And like I was on a project, I remember, where I was working with a data engineer, and the data engineering stuff, like I could not keep track. Like he explained how to do it, and it took me like half a dozen explanations before I could actually do the basic data engineering stuff. But then I was doing stuff with it that he was commenting, like he was really impressed, and he's like, I would never have thought to do this way. And so I think, I don't know if it's autism. I feel like this is more of an, well, the thing is, autism, I'm not sure is one thing, and ADHD, I'm not sure is one thing. But I think this, and then the other thing is, again, I am also gifted. I was not in a gifted program, but I am like, I was always, academic stuff was easy. My IQ correlated scores are complicated because of the ceiling effect and my low processing speed, but enough to definitely be gifted based on any cutoff I've seen. And so there's that triple exceptional thing. Well, that's sort of an interesting question. Is a lot of like ADHD traits, or a lot of can be triply exceptional. So ADHD plus gifted, I feel like reflects personality. Like one thing, I grew up like I was told like I was smart, and that was one of the few things I was good for. And I realized I was becoming more risk averse for stuff that would make me look dumb. And in undergrad, I learned about fixed versus fluid intelligence, and I latched onto that hard. And so I've tended to say that like the stuff I do that people think is smart is basically just me being like curious and like diving into it. But I think now, as I'm thinking about it more, I think there is a cognitive scaffolding for some of this where I am able to like, there's like, so like hyperlexia, right? Like I taught myself to read before the age of 3, and that's common for autistic people. Like I had obviously the social environment, and my parents read to me a lot and were willing to read to me enough that I could memorize Princess and the Pea. And then I matched that to the words on the pages. And I wrote a blog post on sort of reconstructing how I think I taught myself to read. And so the being able to memorize this and match to words on the pages, I'm not sure how common, how widespread that is in populations general. Like that might be sort of unusual, but then it compounds because my personality is that I want to keep digging and try to understand stuff. And part of that might also be because I don't think the way most people do, and so I don't understand the framing. But I also keep mentioning my favorite fiction writer is Jack Vance. And probably my favorite Jack Vance story is Goyle of Sphere in the Dying Earth series. And he's described as having a hole in his head because he needs to always understand like why and how. And Jack Vance is someone who I think was pretty obviously thrice exceptional himself. And so there are these personality elements here, because there's also, like I mentioned, Anne of Green Gables, who, like, she says, well, I make a lot of mistakes, but I'll eventually run out of mistakes because I never make the same mistake twice. And I aspire to do that. And then I realized that was how Ortega y Gasset defined his idea of a natural aristocrat, which is like a personality thing. And so I think it's all like, I wonder to some degree, like, I'm not sure how we draw the line between whether we call something a personality trait or whether we call it a developmental disorder, aside from that it's seen as being maladaptive. Like narcissism is a personality trait, right? But it's also, like, to a pathological level, we call it a disorder, right? And so, yeah, so I'm just musing. I don't have a clear idea on this. I think it's up to 60% now. Yeah. So detail oriented presumes no ADHD, but half autistic people have ADHD. But again, people sincerely mean that I am detail oriented, but they're talking about, like, I can see facets and angles and wrinkles in things like at the high level, which is not the same thing as implementational detail oriented. So I think there is a bit of an equivocation there. But the detail oriented, like the implementational level detail oriented with autism, I mean, the thing I wonder is how common, like when I was diagnosed, I said most people like me would have been diagnosed with nothing or with ADHD. And so I sort of saw what that looked like, where it was the actual, like a friend was asking, does anyone here in this group of autistic people really have only a handful of rigid special interests? And I'm like, I do not. But I knew, like, most of the people, like the autistic people in the program that I was in, were that way. But it is like, even though only 60% of autistic people are diagnosed with ADHD, or a lot of the autistic people who do not have an ADHD diagnosis still don't have that level of like extreme, like narrow special interest and sort of implementation level detail orientation. Although they may be, I think they often are better at it. But also, the two people I know best who are diagnosed with autism but not ADHD are both women. And I think women in general are often better at implementational level, like detail oriented stuff, when it's not so, like, when you get like the weird outliers, if it's like the person who loves data entry and is happy to do data entry like 12 hours a day for their whole life, that's generally going to be like a man. But when it comes to just like a basic level of like functional implementational detail orientation needed for the workplace, I feel like women are more likely to have that. And so they do have that element, right, of that detail oriented, but I don't know if it's because of autism or because they're women and they have it in spite of autism. And the other thing that I think about with one of the things I think about with ADHD versus autism is the range of interests. Because again, the stereotype is you have like maybe 2 or 3 interests that you rarely deviate from. And I knew a lot of people like that when I was in high school, but now most autistic people I know, even those who are not diagnosed with ADHD, are not like that. Deleuze would have something to say about TS about this. Yeah, I still need to. I have a friend who keeps telling me to read Deleuze, and I know he's one of the people viewers keep reading. And I'm reading Nick Land, who was originally a Deleuze scholar, and I'm reading Slavoj Žižek, who also references Deleuze a lot. So I really need to read Deleuze, but I don't know when I will get to that. I don't really have a ton of predictability in what I will read. Aside from, I'm realizing, like, I tend to categorize my reading as either escapist, sort of like science fiction fantasy, or as sort of philosophy where I'm trying to get frameworks, or like history and natural history books where, again, it's kind of escapist, but like with a different angle. And like a lot of my reading, I'm realizing, is which mood am I in to read? Do I want to read like the dense philosophical stuff? Do I want to read the more straightforward, like, but also sort of immersive, like historical or like natural history stuff? Or do I want to just completely read completely escapist stuff? So Nick Land was an early, like, he was a Duluth scholar. He was a founder of a cybernetics institution. And then he was originally quite like left-leaning. And then he quit his job at the cybernetics group institution he co-founded, disappeared off the map for a few years, and showed up in China with a blog where he was promoting the idea of neo-reaction. And so he moved from being kind of, if you use the right-left political spectrum, from being far left to far right, although he is like really original. Like, I'm reading like the collection of his Xenosystems blog posts, the best Xenosystems blog posts, and a lot of his cybernetic observations are really interesting ones that I haven't seen elsewhere. He left you dumbfounded in a bad way, it sounds like you're saying. Like, how could anyone say this? Or confusing. Did you read Xenosystems or did you read Fang Noumena? Because Fang Noumena, I'm realizing a lot of, unless you are very familiar with Deleuze, I imagine, like a lot of the things that I've read in there, I am not sure. I actually want to make a video about. I got Fang Noumena through Bookshop, which, because it was after reading most of Xenosystems, I was like, I really find this interesting. I want to read his older stuff. And it was out of stock and maybe out of print. It wasn't clear. Amazon thought it was out of print, and the used copies were up to like $125. And I'm like, I'm not paying that for this $30 book, especially when I'm, unemployed, right? And then I found Bookshop had it, and I ordered it, and they delivered. So I'm so happy about that. Yeah, I think one thing is the friend who is telling me to read Deleuze also keeps telling me I need to read more Nietzsche before I read Deleuze. But someone in my channel suggested that I might want to read Deleuze on Nietzsche as sort of an introduction to get me into. Okay, interesting. I haven't read Deleuze myself, so actually, so Xenosystems, he apparently did like a self-published, smaller, like forbidden Xenosystems with his truly controversial stuff, and I have not ordered or read that, so I'm not actually sure. I did read his book on the Dark Enlightenment, but that was mostly him sort of summarizing, mostly making it look like Yarvin was fully behind it, although if you read his stuff, like he references Spandrel a lot more than he references Yarvin. I absolutely agree. And I think often if someone is controversial but original, it is often a better case for reading them. Like I've mentioned Carl Schmitt a few times, who he was initially a defender of like Weimar Germany, and then and he was like, Hindenburg, do not like put the Nazis or the communists like in power, no matter if they win the most seats. And then the Nazis won the most seats, and so Hindenburg appointed Hitler, and Schmitt immediately did an about face and became one of the leading propagandists for the Nazis. But his work has been so, and not only that, but he was reportedly kind of anti-Semitic too, although it's not clear he was a Catholic. And like European Catholicism at the time was, it's not clear to me if he was like not normal Nazi level or just like European Catholic level. But anyways, he is someone who, his ideas have been so influential, and I've only read, I think, 3 of his books so far, so I need to read more of his books. And they're all short, but they're also like dense and require thinking. But and so he is someone where it's like, most of them are published by academic presses with like an introduction saying, so yeah, he was a Nazi who was kind of an anti-Semite, but his thinking is so important that he's like persisted because of it. And one of the things that I sort of talked about that I want to elaborate on, and I was going to call it the Madagascar principle, and then I read the Sloth Lemur song, and she claims that the evidence, because my understanding, what I was always taught about Madagascar is that it was right next to Africa, but it was one of the last landmasses settled when people from Indonesia came and settled it and then brought some people from Africa over as well. And what Alison Richards of the Sloth Lemur song claims is that Madagascar was actually first settled from Africa, but only sparsely. And then the Indonesians brought rice agriculture and it became more densely populated. So if that's the case, it kind of ruins the analogy. I need to come up with another example. But what I was going to call like the Madagascar, I forget what, like the I forget the term I was going to use, but it's Madagascar something, is like humans, we had to go the long way to Madagascar because we left Africa, went to Indonesia, and then crossed the Indian Ocean to get to Madagascar, even though it's right next to Africa. Like we couldn't have gotten there because the currents just make it hard for stuff to get from Africa to Madagascar. And I think like a lot of like, as I'm reading people like Land or Schmidt or Spandrel or Goldman or Proudhon or Bakunin, I'm meaning to read Lenin and Trotsky, and I haven't, but yeah, because Lenin is short, but I've also seen people say that his writing is terrible. Trotsky is, I've seen multiple people say is worth reading, but his writing is longer. But anyways, the thing about all of them is, in general, I'm not moving dramatically closer to their positions, but grappling with under what circumstances might I agree with their positions? What kind of person would I have to be? Where would I have to be in order to understand like where they're coming from? Leads me to see angles of things like in terms of problems I'm grappling with where I'm like, oh, this is like right here in the conceptual space, but I have sort of a mental block until I get way over here. And so I kind of wish I hadn't read the Sloth Lemur song because the Madagascar example seems so perfect and also memorable. Madagascar is just, but if humans came from Africa first and then Indonesia later, then it ruins that analogy. And I don't have another analogy that works equally well. But sort of that principle of sometimes you need to go way out there in order to see something that is like in adjacent possibility space, but you sort of have a blocker on, or even you don't have a blocker, but just you're so used to like the presuppositions that you don't even see it. I have 2 of his books. I have not read either of them yet. So this is asking if I've read any of David Deutsch, and not yet. But one of them is the Notes on Infinity or whatever. So I might move that up. We'll see. And I don't really. So as I've sort of talked about, I have like broadly, it seems like 3 sort of categories of what I read of being like fiction, like history and like natural history and sort of more narrative based like nonfiction, and then like philosophy. And I have different moods. And then also when I'm in those moods, I don't know what it's going to take what impulse I'm going to have to actually read next. And I will often like have in my mind, like I should be reading these books. And then I just, like I have so many things I want to read. I don't want to force myself to read things because then I'll resent it. Although I will say most literary fiction, although I'm starting to like literary fiction more for its own merits. And pretty much all self-help I have to force myself to read because I rarely have the impulse to actually read literary fiction, and I never have the impulse to actually read self-help because I want to read self-help. But anyways, Deutsch being philosophy, like that is someone I will, at some point, if I read him, it will be just organic. I just don't know what I want to read next until I do it. Yeah, so if I need to read more, there's so many subjects I want to educate myself on, compete with each other. I've wanted to focus on philosophy this year. I mean, the thing about philosophy is it is huge. And so there's the normal approach, like most people reading philosophy will be like, I'm going to focus on a few areas and I'm going to learn about them. So like Travis is no such thing as what? Oh, no such thing as a required author. Sorry. Yeah. So like I have a friend who is working her way through mostly like German, like 19th century German philosophy. And now is like, I've read most of the important thinkers there. And now I'm going to read probably the postmodernists. And then, yeah, this is the person who keeps telling me to read Deleuze, but also read more Nietzsche before you read Deleuze. And then, and then like Travis, who runs the philosophy reading group that I attend, like he obviously like he's an existentialist and he mostly reads stuff that is existentialist or adjacent to it. Although he also like I've recommended some things that he's seems to have some interest in, because I am not, for one thing, I don't identify as an existentialist, and I really didn't think like I was for a long time. I was kind of anti-philosophy because my introduction like in undergrad was to like philosophy bros who are like philosophy is the foundation of everything, and it feels sort of like STEM lords but kind of more insecure, and that kind of put me off philosophy for a long time. And it's interesting, Richard Feynman apparently kind of hated philosophy, and I've started reading some of his stuff, and I should see what he has to say on that. But then I sort of slid into philosophy through religious studies and sociology, because I got an interest in comparative religion, and so I started reading ancient Chinese philosophy, and then that sort of took me to sort of Islamic philosophy and stuff that was influenced by Islamic philosophy a little bit, on one hand. And then like my interest in sociology, like there's a lot of overlap between sociology and philosophy. And so it ended up sort of between those two things, I sort of backdoor got an interest in philosophy. And I'm listening, oh yeah, philosophy is actually really interesting. And most philosophy people are actually reasonable and normal people. It's one of those things where like the philosophy bros I met in undergrad, that's partly, I was in undergrad, right? And like most college undergraduates are kind of obnoxious. And then part of it is, I think, it's just like the loudest, sort of most obnoxious people, the most obnoxious people tend to be like the loudest. And so someone's saying, yeah, well, if you're reading philosophy, Deleuze is required. Definitely Deleuze is a thinker for modern philosophy. A lot of people reference. Richard Rorty said that he thought the three most important philosophers of the 20th century were Heidegger, Wittgenstein, and Dewey. All of them. I've read a little bit of Dewey. I need to read more, and I need to read Heidegger. If I need to read Wittgenstein, I don't know if I should read Heidegger, because like the Travis Ross, who runs the philosophy group, is into Heidegger, but I've also seen a lot of people say don't read Heidegger. He's not worth it. And he is heavily referential on other people, so he's hard if you don't know them to follow. But I was like, I joked and I made like multiple philosophy people, like even as a joke, it still sort of makes them sort of turn red. So I think it's a good joke. Is I don't know who I would say the three most important philosophers of the 20th century are, but if it's an annoying philosophy bro asking, they are Bertrand Russell, Julius Evola, and Ayn Rand. It's mostly Ayn Rand that sort of triggers the philosophy people, because like philosophy people complain about Russell and Evola, but the idea that Ayn Rand even qualifies as a philosopher sort of, I haven't read, I've read Anthem, Ayn Rand's novel, but aside from that, I haven't, and I've read parts of Russell's History of Western Philosophy, but I haven't read the thing cover to cover. And I have not read Evola yet, but I want to, but I don't know how useful he's going to be. Have you heard of collegiate policy debate? No, I haven't. What's that? I'll Google it and see if that tells me anything. Oh, debate at the college level. I see. Yeah. No, I've heard of that. Ted Cruz did that. Yeah, that is the thing is, though, often when philosophers are good at keeping it short, they are also dense. I think that's something that Carl Schmitt is actually good at, is his works are short. They're not overly dense, but they do take a lot of processing to think about. And I read Alastair McIntyre's After Virtue, but he's written a number of books that are thinner as well. But I haven't read them yet, though. Let's see. What are your thoughts on ancient philosophy? I've only read Plato. Haven't got much of him except historical interest so far. So I read Plato's Symposium in high school, and then I reread it a month or so ago. I also, after I read Ortega y Gasset's Revolt of the Masses, I was like, I should read Aristotle, because like I know that this sort of idea of a natural aristocracy goes back to Aristotle. And so Aristotle's Politics actually starts with the part about natural slaves. And so I read that part. I still haven't read the part of the natural aristocracy, which is what I was looking into. I think, like, I've had people tell me, like, yeah, you don't actually need to bother with Plato or Aristotle if you read later people. I've had a lot of people tell me, like, you don't need to bother with so and so. But I'm like, I find that kind of odd, because like I get stuff out of everything, and I don't really know if it's gonna, like, just even when I know about an idea, actually reading the original text tends to throw it into a very different light from my impression of just paraphrase. Even if I'm like, oh, this makes sense, it sounds profound in paraphrase, when I actually go and I read it, it changes things. So I think, like, one of my early relatively successful videos was the title that one was "Don't Start with Plato: How and Why I Read Backwards." And that was because there are, at the time, like, I didn't have enough data to see who my channel was overlapping with in the audience thing, like the creator tab. But I did have, like, I could see, like, on YouTube when I watched my own videos, because I was initially previewing my own videos on like YouTube, and then it started recommending them to me on my main account, and I just started watching them there. So I don't do that anymore. But I was looking at who it was recommending next to my videos, and it was recommending a lot of like classics and like great books people. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's my art audience. But also, I was like, I don't think the great books approach that a lot of people talk about, although apparently like the Harvard classics doesn't do it this way. The great books of the Western world like starts from Plato or pre-Socratics even, I think, and works forward. The Harvard classics jumps around in a way that I think makes more sense. But anyways, this was answering the question, like Plato and like Aristotle, people like that. I think I'm planning on reading them because like references. So I want to read Aristotle's Politics after reading Revolt of the Masses. And again, I only read like the first part, his idea of what constitutes a natural slave, and I'm more interested in the idea of what constitutes a natural aristocrat. But I want to read the whole thing at some point, and I want to read. He apparently has two ethics. So everyone talks about the Nicomachean ethics. There's another one no one talks about that apparently some thinkers, Alastair McIntyre reference, think is more important, and he's sort of skeptical. But I would like to read both of those at the very least. And yeah, I want to read Poetics too, which, and then Plato, I want to read. I don't know specifically. Symposium was a good place to start, but I want to read more Plato. But I sort of need a specific reason. Aristotle, there's like a clear reason of the Politics. I want to sort of understand his concept of what a natural aristocracy looks like, and the Nicomachean Ethics, I want to understand what he actually said in the context of how Alastair McIntyre talked about it. Plato, I do think I want to read, but I think part of it is, aside from the Symposium, which I read in high school, and The Republic, which is his most famous work. Most of his works kind of blend together for me, like in terms of I'm not sure which is which. And so I think I need to start paying more attention to which Plato works people reference, and I do think I want to read that. I read some Al-Ghazali. I want to actually read The Incoherence of Philosophers, and I want to read some of the Islamic Aristotelians, so Avicenna, Averroes, and Al-Farabi. And they obviously, the three of them were heavily influenced by Aristotle. And so after reading that, there might be more of Aristotle than I want to read too. I guess don't know how good of an answer that is. I absolutely think older writers are worth reading, and it's useful to see the original ideas. Like one thing is, my whole life, I was sort of skeptical of Sigmund Freud, but I was constantly taught like Sigmund Freud is foundational to psychology. And then I've realized, no, he really wasn't. William James, sort of what I would consider like good modern psychology, predates Freud. It dates to William James. And then behaviorism sort of ousted James in like research psychology. And then Freud ousted him in clinical psychology, maybe, but he was not medical and it was not scientific. And so I was like taught Freud was like actually like serious, relevant, and underrated. And now that why was I talking about Freud? Oh, Plato, right? Because like Freud himself claimed that his big contribution was recognizing or was proving, like Darwin had shown that like humans evolved from, earlier animals. Well, Freud said, well, my big contribution was, so Galileo took the sun out of the center of the universe. Darwin sort of took humans out of the top of the grand chain of like existence. And Sigmund Freud himself showed that like humans don't even control our own thoughts because the subconscious dominates. But the thing is, Freud, he argued for that. He had a theory of it, and the theory, like the mechanism, was complete bullshit. And so, like, there were people proposing theories of evolution well before Darwin. But Darwin was the one who came up with a mechanism that made sense. And so Freud was not even the first one, because Plato, turns out, basically proposed like the idea that the human needs to like have a charioteer between the reason and the passions and sort of not let either govern, which seems to anticipate Freud's division into the id, the ego, so the charioteer would be the ego, and then the reason would be the superego, and the passions would be the id. So it's like Freud's, like that is original and kind of makes sense, but it basically, Plato predates him, and it's sort of a metaphorical thing, like it's not really scientific, and he didn't demonstrate it. So like I think if I had read Plato and noticed that, I don't, like earlier, I might have been less susceptible to the people sort of trying to tell me Freud was actually, I will say Freud is hugely important to the culture. Like he's given a lot to the vocabulary, but in terms of like relevance to psychology, he's extremely overrated. So I think watching your channel has definitely helped me widen my interests. Enjoy hearing your thought process, perspectives, and how you interconnect. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. So certain people like Freud become more important as a social touch point of thinking than their actual work. And in that case, Freud both gave us a lot of concepts to our language, and he also influenced a lot of people who I think were more likely to provide useful insights than Freud. So like I mentioned, I love Christopher Lasch, and Christopher Lasch frequently mentions Freud. And so Erich Fromm, at least, I don't know about the rest of the Frankfurt School, but at least Erich Fromm was a big fan of, like, a lot of his work was trying to integrate Marx and Freud. And I think I'm not convinced of how necessarily useful these are, but as a framework, like Fromm's ideas are interesting and not as obviously bullshit as Freud's are. And of course, Slavoj Žižek is a big fan of Lacan, who tried to rehabilitate Freud. Buckminster Fuller is to tech culture as Freud is to psychology. Honestly, the buckyball is the only thing I know about Buckminster Fuller, so I'd have to look into him more. Okay, I think I'm probably going to end it soon. Oh, interesting. His Worship the Steve Jobs era. It's been about 2.5 hours. Again, it was last time, although broken up in two because of the moving the computer upstairs and not getting the camera back till I ended the stream and started a new one. I think if I do outdoors again, it'll probably be in the morning, which I could actually do. I'm thinking I'm going to do, so I'm doing one in August, and it's the Saturday after my father's birthday was August 11th, so it's the Saturday after that. I think I'm going to do it at 10 a.m. Sorry, 9 a.m. Thank you. I'm going to check out your channel because it seems like you're out, especially the video. Was it the one about programmers and reading literature? It's interesting. Thoughts on the American Transcendentalist movement? I mentioned, like in the first half of the stream, I'm skeptical of transcendentalism. And the reason for that is, so talk about Koestler's idea of like holons and holarchies, right? So humans are, we are, like our cognition is it's not really part of, like, our cognition is like the result of these emergent processes that make it up. And then our social systems, we make up ourselves. And both Friedrich Hayek and Ted Kaczynski have basically argued that, not using the same term, basically like a lower holon can't understand a higher holon. And I think transcendentalism, sorry, not transhumanism, sorry, transcendentalism. No, I've been meaning to read Thoreau and Emerson, like based on like my essay video, people telling me I should, and I've had their books for a while, but I haven't read them yet. So when I do, I'll have thoughts, I'm sure, but I haven't gotten around to that. And then how did you get involved in Taoism? So I read the Tao Te Ching in high school in that same ancient and medieval literature class. And I was nice, but then I've already read some Nietzsche, but I need to read more. Right, so I ended up, I forget how I found out these existed, but I learned that Princeton has like Illustrated Library of Chinese Classics by C.C. Tsai, and I've shown those. And that's actually a subset of what's available as the bilingual edition by the same translator, Brian Buria, and the same cartoonist. And so I read The Way of Nature, which is the illustrated version of the Zhuangzi, and I was like, wow, this is, the Tao Te Ching was sort of profound, but not super useful. The Zhuangzi felt super useful. And then I learned about the Liegi, and I read that. And when I talk about Taoism, I'm really talking about the Zhuangzi and the Liegi for the most part. I know that the Taoist canon is huge. I still haven't read the Wenzi. I've read a couple of the Taoist chapters of the Guanzi. There's not a lot in it, but from a sort of questionable translation, and I'm not sure how much, it doesn't really tell me anything. So really, when I'm talking about Taoism, I'm talking about the ideas that I'm getting from the Zhuangzi and the Liegi. Yep, okay. I think I'll end it here unless anyone has final questions. Okay, thank you all for watching and questions. And again, I'm going to do another one Saturday morning after August 11th. And that one might be fully outside because no mosquito concerns. We'll see. Okay, well, thank you all. Have a good evening.